see, they had a very radical idea of Sikhism. So Khalistanis, they were a radical group within Sikhism. So not all Sikhs subscribe to the ideology of Khalistanis. That's an important point to understand. And in my research, actually, I've not said that they only targeted Hindus. They actually targeted Sikhs also. The
Yeah.
same Sikhs who were sympathetic to Hindus. So many Sikhs did not subscribe to this radical ideology of Khalistan, and they actually wanted to empathize with Hindus, and they were also victims of this violence. Right. So that is something which is very important to understand, because the Khalistanis actually had vested interests in, of course, they wanted their own separate state of Khalistan, but they had a
Mm.
very huge support from Pakistan. They had funding from Pakistan. They had support from Pakistan military, and they built their base outside India, in UK, in Canada. And in UK and Canada, again, they had support from the Pakistani groups. So they were actually the Khalistan movement, which started with asking for opposing the so-called imposition of Hindi in Punjab, and asking for a separate Sikh state and all of that. That's how it started, but it very quickly became a very radicalized movement and a very terrorist movement, because they were eventually terrorists. Let's call them what they were, right? And unfortunately, now these terrorists have built such a huge support base outside India, in UK and in Canada, that most of even the Sikhs today, they don't really remember that even the Sikhs had suffered at the hands of these terrorists back in the 80s and the 90s, and they think that it is their duty or whatever to support the separatist groups, especially the Sikhs who have grown up outside India. A lot of them don't really know the proper history of the Khalistan movement, and how their own Sikh people died in, in that, even in that whole attack on in Operation Blue Star, where even in the attack on the Golden Temple, a lot of the people who died were civilians, and they were Sikhs and Hindus. So in that whole conflict, the Sikhs and Hindus were actually the biggest victims. And the Khalistanis, they did a few stunts, so to say, where they hijacked an airline, and they hijacked, I think they hijacked two airlines, and they did these type of things just to pressure the government into yielding to their demands, to giving into their demands. But that didn't work. They were just trying to show that we are a huge group, huge militant group. We should not. We're trying to scare people into submission, basically, but that did not work essentially. So there's a very long history of repeated attacks carried out by the Khalistanis, and it keeps getting all very muddled up, because in 1984 there was genocide against the Sikhs, and that was again the same kind of mindless violence carried out by Congressis who targeted all Sikhs, whereas not all Sikhs were a part of the Khalistan movement, right?
Yes.
And that further triggered that whole further retaliation from the side of Khalistani. So in a sense, in many ways, the Sikhs were very unfairly treated, very unfairly targeted, because they were not all were on the side of Khalistan, and in some way you were actually pushing them towards the terrorist side, right? When you conduct such a mass violence and such huge atrocities. So this whole saga basically kept continuing all through the 80s. They were like, I mean, this whole series of militant attacks, up till the 90s, actually. So this whole movement finally lost steam because it did not have enough supporters. That
Yes.
is the truth. That they did not have enough supporters even within Punjab in India. And even, I mean, I know this is not entirely related, but even today, a lot of these so called farmers' protests, they're actually fueled by the same Khalistani separatists. They know that they cannot go and carry out those sort of militant attacks openly as they did in the 80s and the 90s. But these protests are sort of like, a sublimation of that same violence. where they are disrupting our roads even during the COVID, surge. So many people did not even get proper oxygen. What else do you call that? I mean, that's indirectly forcing people into death, essentially, right? And they have been butchering and torturing and harassing people in Punjab to join the farmers' protests. I wanted to talk about the farmers' protests here because most people don't understand that it is fueled and it is completely hijacked by these separatist Khalistani groups, not just in India, but even outside India. So there were many rallies in support of the farmers' protests in US, in UK, in Canada especially. And the Canadian government needs to weigh in. They need to rein in on these separatist groups, but they don't, because a weak India is always very good for other Western powers, right? So I don't want to go into too much of geopolitics of that, but this radical movement was against anybody who did not subscribe to their ideology, and namely the Hindus and the Sikhs who sympathized with the Hindus. So I think that's a good summary of it. Otherwise, there's a timeline which you can go and check out on hindugenocide.com/timeline, where we have actually put together a whole series of incidents where the militants basically attacked the Hindus and Sikhs.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.